In 1592, a single Korean war cart unleashed 200 fire arrows in one screaming volley and shattered a force many times its size. Within a century, almost no one remembered it existed. Here is the twist. Some of the deadliest tools ever carried into battle vanished from memory entirely, buried beneath the swords and cannons everyone thinks they know. Number 18 let one soldier reload faster than 10 archers could draw. Number 2 burned on the surface of the sea and could not be put out with water. And number 1 was so small it fit in your hand, yet it built knights, toppled kingdoms, and redrew the medieval world. These 25 weapons did not just win battles, they changed what war itself could be. Before we start, hit subscribe, because most history books skip every single one of these. Let us begin the countdown. Number 25, the atlatl. Long before metal, before even the bow, prehistoric hunters carried a simple notched stick that quietly rewrote the rules of survival. The atlatl was a throwing lever, a length of wood or bone with a hook at one end that cradled the base of a light spear. With a single flick of the wrist, it added a second joint to the human arm, multiplying the force a hunter could deliver. A dart thrown by hand might travel 40 yards. Launched from an atlatl, it could fly over 100 yards and punch clean through hide and bone. Archaeologists have found these tools on nearly every inhabited continent, some dating back tens of thousands of years. It let small bands bring down mammoths and eventually each other. When Spanish conquistadors reached the Americas, Aztec warriors were still using it, and its darts could pierce steel armor. The atlatl was humanity's first true force multiplier, the distant ancestor of every projectile weapon that followed. Number 24, the sling. It looks like a child's toy, 2 cords and a leather pouch, yet for thousands of years, the sling was one of the most feared weapons on any battlefield. A trained slinger could hurl a lead bullet faster than a modern pitcher throws a baseball, and accurately at distances that embarrassed early archers. The Balearic slingers of the Western Mediterranean were so prized that Carthage and Rome both fought to recruit them. Their ammunition was often cast lead, shaped to fly true, and some bullets were even stamped with taunts, meant for the enemy, who would dig them out of a comrade. The story of David and Goliath was no fairy tale. A sling stone to the temple could kill a fully armored man, and the weapon cost almost nothing. While a bow took years to master and a coin to build, any shepherd could carry the sling that humbled empires. Number 23, the caltrop. Some weapons do not strike, they wait. The caltrop was a small iron device with 4 sharp spikes, forged so that no matter how it landed, one point always faced straight up. Scattered across a road or a riverbed by the thousands, these tiny barbs turned open ground into a trap that crippled horses and footmen alike. The Romans called them tribulus and used them to blunt cavalry charges and protect their flanks. A single handful, flung in retreat, could break the momentum of a pursuing column. They were cheap to make, easy to carry, and almost impossible to clear quickly under fire. For 2,000 years, from ancient sieges to the muddy roads of the Second World War, armies kept scattering caltrops because the simplest way to stop a charging enemy was to make the very earth beneath him bite. Number 22, the macuahuitl. The Aztecs never discovered iron, yet they carried a sword that horrified the conquistadors who faced it. The macuahuitl was a flat wooden paddle lined along both edges with blades of razor-sharp obsidian, volcanic glass honed finer than any steel of the age. Eyewitness accounts from the Spanish conquest describe it slicing through flesh with terrible ease, and one chronicler claimed he watched a warrior behead a horse with a single swing. Obsidian shatters, so the weapon dulled fast, but in the press of close combat, a fresh edge meant devastating wounds. It was also designed to maim rather than kill outright, because Aztec warfare prized live captives. The macuahuitl proves a hard truth of military history. A civilization without metallurgy could still build a blade that gave armored European soldiers nightmares, and it vanished only because the culture that wielded it was destroyed. Number 21. The phalanx. When Rome marched into Dacia in the lands that are now Romania, its legions met a weapon that forced them to redesign their armor. The phalanx was a long two-handed blade, curved like a sickle, with the cutting edge on the inside of the hook. That shape let a Dacian warrior reach over the top of a Roman shield and hook downward or sweep beneath it to take a leg. Worse, the curve concentrated the entire force of the swing into a single point, and that point could split a helmet and the skull beneath it. The legions, who rarely changed anything that worked, were so alarmed that they reinforced their helmets with iron crossbars and strapped articulated plates onto their sword arms. Few weapons in history ever frightened Rome into upgrading its kit mid-campaign. The phalanx did, and then it disappeared with the people who forged it. Number 20. The pilum. The Roman legionary's secret was not only his short sword, it was the heavy javelin he threw seconds before contact. The pilum was engineered with a long, soft iron shank behind a hardened tip. On impact, it punched through a shield, and then the thin neck bent under the weight, so the enemy could not pull it free or throw it back. A warrior with a javelin lodged in his shield had two grim choices: fight on with a heavy, unbalanced board dragging at his arm, or drop his only protection entirely. Either way, the legion's front rank closed the gap and went to work with the gladius. The genius was not in the killing, it was in disarming the enemy before the killing began. This single throwaway spear, used in disciplined volleys, helped Rome conquer the known world, then quietly faded as the empire's tactics changed. Number 19. The war scythe. Few weapons carry as much desperate defiance as the war scythe. It began as the farmer's harvesting tool, a curved blade meant for cutting wheat, until rebels and conscripts reforged it for cutting men. By straightening the blade so it pointed upward along the shaft, a peasant turned a symbol of the harvest into a brutal polearm capable of piercing armor and hooking riders from the saddle. The Polish kosynierzi, scythe-bearing militiamen, charged regular armies with these weapons in the uprisings of the 18th century and won real battles against trained soldiers. The war scythe mattered because it armed the poor. When a kingdom called up men who owned nothing but their tools, the scythe meant a peasant could face a knight with steel in his hands. It was the weapon of revolutions, the proof that a desperate crowd could become an army overnight. Number 18. The repeating crossbow. Centuries before the machine gun, Chinese armies fielded a weapon that fired bolts almost as fast as a man could pull a lever. The repeating crossbow, often tied to the legendary strategist Zhuge Liang, held a magazine of bolts above the stock. Each pull of the lever dropped a fresh bolt into place, drew the string, and loosed it in one fluid motion. A single soldier could send a dozen bolts downrange in the time a normal archer nocked a few arrows. The bolts were light and the range modest, so defenders often tipped them with poison to make every hit count. Massed along a wall, ranks of these crossbows threw up a wall of projectiles that broke charges before they reached the gate. It was rapid fire 2,000 years early, a glimpse of automatic warfare that the world would not see again until gunpowder finally caught up. Number 17. The hwacha. Korea's answer to the invading armies of the 16th century was a war cart that rained fire. The hwacha was a mobile launcher, a wooden frame drilled with rows of holes, each loaded with a singajon, an arrow fitted with a small gunpowder charge that ignited and rocketed forward. A single hwacha could volley 100 or 200 fire arrows in one terrifying salvo, each one trailing smoke before it struck home and burst. During the Imjin War, Korean defenders lined city walls with these carts and tore apart formations that vastly outnumbered them. The psychological effect was as devastating as the physical one. Men who had never seen flying fire broke and ran. The hwacha was one of the earliest true rocket artillery systems on Earth, a weapon that turned a small defending force into a storm of flame and then slipped almost entirely out of the world's memory. Number 16. The fire lance. Every gun on the planet traces its bloodline to a bamboo tube strapped to a spear. The fire lance, born in Song Dynasty China, was exactly that. A tube packed with an early gunpowder mixture fixed to the end of a polearm that spat flame and fragments of pottery, sand, and metal at anyone unlucky enough to be in front of it. At first, it was a one-shot flamethrower, a way to clear an enemy off a wall in a shower of sparks. But over generations, the tube grew metal, the charge grew stronger, and someone realized that a tight-fitting projectile could be hurled out with real force. That realization became the hand cannon and then the gun. The fire lance is the missing link of military history, the crude, smoking ancestor that turned chemistry into the single most decisive force warfare has ever known. Number 15. The naval ram. Before cannons could sink a ship, the ship itself was the weapon. Ancient war galleys carried a heavy bronze ram fixed to the bow at the waterline, shaped to shatter the hull of an enemy vessel on impact. Crewed by banks of rowers driving the ship forward at ramming speed, a trireme became a guided missile of timber and bronze, aiming to crack open the side of its target and send it to the bottom. At the Battle of Salamis, Greek triremes used these rams to break a far larger Persian fleet and change the course of Western history. Naval tactics revolved entirely around the ram for centuries, every maneuver designed to line up a killing strike or avoid one. It vanished only when boarding and then gunpowder made smashing hulls obsolete. But for the ancient world, the deadliest part of a warship was the ship itself. Number 14. The onager. Roman engineers gave their armies a machine that could throw stones with the fury of a kicking mule, which is exactly how it got its name. The onager was a torsion catapult, storing enormous energy in a tightly twisted bundle of rope or sinew. When the arm was released, it snapped upward against a crossbar and hurled a stone, a clay pot of fire, or a hail of smaller shot in a high arc over enemy walls. A single well-built onager could fling a stone weighing dozens of pounds across hundreds of feet, cracking battlements and crushing whatever stood behind them. It needed no gunpowder, only twisted fiber and the patient mathematics of Roman siegecraft. For centuries, it was the heavy artillery of the ancient world, a weapon that let an army reach over a fortress wall and strike the men who thought stone had made them safe. Number 13. The ballista. If the onager was the sledgehammer, the ballista was the sniper rifle of antiquity. Built on the same torsion principle, twin arms drawn back against bundles of twisted sinew, it fired not stones but enormous bolts with terrifying precision. A large ballista could drive an iron-tipped shaft through a shield, the man behind it, and still have force to spare. Smaller, cart-mounted versions, sometimes called scorpions, could be aimed at individual officers across a battlefield, picking off leadership before the lines even clashed. At the siege of major cities, rows of these engines swept the walls clear of defenders. The Romans standardized and mass-produced them, turning artillery into a science centuries before the cannon. The ballista proved that accuracy at range could decide a fight, a lesson the world relearned every time a new generation discovered that the side which strikes first and farthest usually wins. Number 12, the hand cannon. The hand cannon. The first guns did not look like guns at all. The hand cannon was little more than a metal tube sealed at one end, loaded with powder and a stone or iron ball, and touched off through a small hole with a glowing match held by the firer. It was wildly inaccurate, slow to load, and dangerous to the man holding it. And it did not matter. The roar, the smoke, and the unstoppable lead ball that no shield or breastplate could reliably turn aside changed everything. A peasant given a hand cannon and an afternoon of training could kill a knight who had trained from childhood. That single fact dissolved 1,000 years of martial aristocracy. The hand cannon was crude and frightening even to its users, but it lit the fuse on the entire age of firearms, and the armored knight never fully recovered. Number 11, the bombard. When the walls of Constantinople, the mightiest fortifications in the medieval world, finally fell in 1453, it was a giant gun that broke them. The bombard was an enormous early cannon, some cast so large they had to be transported in pieces by teams of oxen and assembled on site. The great gun, built for the Ottoman siege, could hurl a stone ball weighing hundreds of pounds against ramparts that had defied attackers for 1,000 years. It fired only a handful of times a day, took an age to cool and reload, and sometimes burst and killed its own crew. But each colossal impact shook stone loose that no battering ram had ever threatened. The bombard ended the age of the impregnable castle. Once a wall could be smashed from a distance, the entire logic of defense, of safety behind high stone, came crashing down with it. Number 10, the Congreve rocket. The line in the American national anthem about the rocket's red glare was not poetry. It was a battlefield report. The Congreve rocket was a British weapon, an iron tube packed with propellant and a warhead, stabilized by a long wooden stick, launched in screaming swarms toward enemy lines. They were inaccurate to the point of comedy, often veering wildly off course, but that was almost the point. Fired by the hundreds, they set fires, panicked horses, and broke the nerve of soldiers who had never seen flame come howling out of the sky. The British used them against American forces in the War of 1812 and across the Napoleonic battlefields of Europe. The Congreve rocket was the ancestor of every military rocket and missile that followed. The moment armies realized that a weapon did not have to be accurate to be decisive, it only had to be terrifying. Number 9, the puckle gun. In 1718, an English inventor patented a weapon 2 centuries ahead of its time. The puckle gun was a tripod-mounted flintlock with a revolving cylinder of chambers, designed to fire round after round far faster than any musket of the age. One man could keep up a stream of fire that would normally take a squad. Its inventor even proposed loading it with square bullets for enemies he considered uncivilized, believing they would inflict worse wounds, a strange and grim footnote to its history. The gun never caught on. The manufacturing of the era could not produce its parts reliably, and investors were unconvinced. But the idea, a single operator delivering sustained, rapid fire from a mounted weapon was the exact concept that would one day become the machine gun and dominate the battlefields of the 20th century. The puckle gun was a glimpse of the future that arrived too early. Number 8. The mini ball. A single small change to the shape of a bullet helped make the American Civil War the bloodbath it became. For centuries, soldiers had carried smoothbore muskets, fast to load, but accurate only at close range. Rifled barrels were deadlier but agonizingly slow because the bullet had to be forced down a grooved barrel. The mini ball solved it. This conical lead bullet was made slightly smaller than the barrel, so it dropped in easily and then expanded when fired to grip the rifling flying straight and far. Suddenly, ordinary infantry could reload quickly and hit a man at distances that old tactics never imagined. But the generals still marched men shoulder to shoulder into the open, the way their grandfathers had. The result was slaughter on an unprecedented scale. A humble, reshaped bullet had outpaced the tactics meant to use it, and tens of thousands paid the price. Number 7. The bayonet. One simple attachment erased an entire class of soldier from the battlefield. For ages, armies needed two kinds of infantry, gunners to shoot and pikemen to protect them from cavalry while they reloaded. The bayonet, a blade fixed to the muzzle of a musket, collapsed both jobs into one man. Now every musketeer was also a spearman. He could fire at range, then meet a cavalry charge or close with the enemy at the point of a blade without changing weapons or formation. The dedicated pikemen, who had ruled European battlefields for 200 years, simply ceased to exist. The bayonet seems almost too obvious to be revolutionary, but it doubled the usefulness of every soldier and reshaped how armies were organized down to their core. Few small inventions ever made an entire profession of warriors obsolete overnight. The bayonet did exactly that. Number 6. The pike. Before gunpowder ruled the field, a forest of long spears humbled the proudest knights in Europe. The pike was a simple thing, an iron point on a shaft up to 18 feet long, but its power came from numbers and discipline. Hundreds of men packed shoulder to shoulder, pikes leveled in overlapping rows, forming a moving wall of points that no horse on earth would charge into. The Swiss pikemen built a fearsome reputation, crushing the armored cavalry that had dominated the continent for centuries, and mercenary pike blocks became the most sought-after soldiers in Europe. A peasant with a long stick, multiplied by the man beside him and the 1,000 behind, could stop a charging knight in gleaming steel. The pike returned the foot soldier to the center of the battlefield, and in doing so, it began the slow death of the age of chivalry. Number 5. The trebuchet. The most powerful siege engine ever built before gunpowder did not rely on twisted rope or human muscle. It harnessed gravity itself. The counterweight trebuchet used a massive weighted arm on a pivot. When a heavy box of stone or earth dropped, the long end of the arm whipped upward and slung a projectile with astonishing force and range. The largest could hurl stones weighing hundreds of pounds far enough to batter a castle wall to rubble, throwing missile after missile with mechanical patience until something gave way. Besieging armies also used them to fling fire, dead animals, and disease into a fortress to break the will of those inside. For a few centuries, the trebuchet was the king of siege warfare, the weapon that decided whether a city stood or fell. It reigned until the cannon arrived and proved that chemistry could do in seconds what gravity needed all day to achieve. Number 4. The composite bow. The single weapon that allowed nomadic horsemen to terrorize and conquer half the world was a marvel of ancient engineering. The composite bow was built from layers of wood, animal horn, and sinew glued together, a design that stored far more energy than a simple wooden bow of the same size. Crucially, it was short enough to be drawn and fired from the back of a galloping horse. This is the weapon that armed the steppe warriors, and above all the Mongols, who used it to build the largest land empire in history. A Mongol rider could loose arrow after arrow at a full gallop, wheeling and retreating and firing backward over his horse's tail, breaking armies that could never catch him. The composite bow turned mobility into a weapon. It let a relatively small people on horseback dominate settled civilizations from China to the gates of Europe. Number 3, the chariot. For 1,000 years, the chariot was the tank of the ancient world, the weapon that separated great powers from everyone else. It was a light cart pulled by fast horses, carrying a driver and an archer or a spearman. It brought speed, height, and a stable firing platform to battlefields that had only known men on foot. Chariot forces could race along enemy lines, loose volleys of arrows, then wheel away before the infantry could respond. At the Battle of Kadesh, one of the earliest battles in recorded history, Egyptian and Hittite chariots clashed in the thousands in a struggle that shaped the ancient Near East. Owning chariots required wealth, horses, skilled crews, and specialized workshops, so they marked the rise of organized states and professional armies. The chariot dominated warfare until cavalry and disciplined infantry finally overtook it. But for ages, it was the ultimate symbol of military power. Number 2, Greek fire. The Byzantine Empire possessed a weapon so terrifying and so secret that its exact formula is still lost today. Greek fire was a liquid incendiary, sprayed from siphons mounted on warships that burst into flame on contact and, most horrifying of all, kept burning on the surface of the water. Sailors could not put it out by jumping overboard. They could not smother it. It clung and consumed. The Byzantines used it to incinerate entire enemy fleets and twice saved Constantinople from massive seaborne sieges that should have ended the empire. The recipe was such a closely guarded state secret that it was known only to a handful of people and ultimately died with them. Greek fire is the great mystery of military history, a weapon centuries ahead of its time that protected a civilization for hundreds of years and then vanished so completely that no one has ever fully recreated it. Number 1, the stirrup. The single most revolutionary weapon on this list is not a blade or a bow or a gun. It is a simple leather loop you rest your foot in. Before the stirrup, a rider on horseback was unstable. He could throw a spear or slash with a sword, but if he tried to drive a lance home at a full charge, the impact would knock him clean off his own horse. The stirrup changed that completely. Braced in the saddle with both feet locked, a rider could now couch a lance and put the entire weight and speed of a galloping horse behind a single point of steel. That one innovation created the armored knight, the most fearsome warrior of the medieval world. Some historians argue it reshaped society itself, that the cost of raising heavy cavalry helped build the entire feudal system of lords and vassals. A loop of leather built the knight, and the knight built the Middle Ages. From the prehistoric atlatl that opened our list to the humble stirrup that crowned it, these 25 forgotten weapons share one quiet truth. The tools that changed warfare most were rarely the loudest or the largest. A leather loop, a notched stick, a clay pot of fire, each rewrote the limits of what armies could do, then slipped out of memory as something newer took its place. History remembers the battles. It forgets the inventions that decided them. Which one surprised you the most? Tell me in the comments, and let me know which forgotten weapon you would have ranked number 1.